What if Deku was the reincarnation of Gohan? How would this pan out in the story of My Hero Academia if Deku was actually born with the latent potential that Gohan wields in the Dragon Ball Z universe and Super as well? Meaning he's gonna be able to unlock that beastly potential that Gohan has. See what I did there? Anyways, though, seriously, if you guys go on to enjoy this part, then just know that by becoming a member, you guys can actually get access to the rest of the full story before it even comes out on the channel. So if you guys are interested in that, just click the join button down below and you guys can become a member of the channel and support it and, you know, get your comments replied to really fast. But with all that out of the way, I just hope you guys go on to enjoy today's What If. And if you do, share it with a friend. Who knows? Maybe they'll like it too. Anyways, let's get started.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Our story starts off the day that Izuku and his mom are pretty much chilling on the roof of his apartment. Izuku at this point was just told by the doctors that he doesn't really look likely like Izuku will ever develop a quirk just due to his bone in his joint, right? And Izuku is having not exactly the best day. When Inko walked in on Izuku crying and feeling as if he could never become a hero, instead of just telling Izuku that everything was, you know, like all hopes were lost, she went over to Izuku and basically tells him to come with her. He does through tears and sadness, and you know, he does the walk of shame towards the top of the roof. Simultaneously at this time, we would have a beautiful sunrise outside. Now Inko would essentially just be sitting there with, you know, Deku, and he's just playing, thinking that maybe things won't be so bad. You know, he looks towards the sunset, Inko looks down at her phone, and it's at this moment that she begins to send a text to Hisashi. She's like, hey, sorry, but the doctors just found out that Izuku will most likely never get a quirk. Izuku's gonna be quirkless. Hisashi texts back being like, are you serious? Like, my kid's gonna be quirkless? Like, it's your fault. You made a defective kid. Inko immediately texts back saying that that's still their son and that, you know, she still cares about him and that, you know, that's not a good thing to say at all. Hisashi just texts back 3 dots and Inko literally doesn't hear from him pretty much ever again, right? But while she was in the process of this, Izuku it's probably going to come to you guys what's happening because, you know, they're on top of a roof. It's pretty basic. Izuku basically wanders off towards the edge of the building and he's looking towards it. When suddenly there's like a strong gust of wind. Let's just say that a villain attack, right? And that gust of wind like slightly makes Izuku shake and he's, you know, he's struggling to get his balance, so he pretty much just falls off of this roof, right? And when Izuku's falling, he would just be thinking about how this is the end and, you know, like tears begin coming down his eyes, but he gets angry and just, no, you know, he like flies off, like he literally flies past it and straight goes into a building, like breaking like the top of a building, making it so that Izuku pretty much ends up landing in a building and is just blatantly knocked out. The people who were living there would look outside to see this hole in their wall and then, you know, Inko on the top of another roof, and they're like, hey, yo. And, you know, Izuku basically gets called the fire department and, you know, they then pretty much get a bill for Izuku's, you know, outburst, which is of course covered by the quirk insurance, which basically makes it so any accidents are just covered by the Society of Heroes, right? Izuku then is taken right back to the quirk doctor where he's essentially told that by these charts here, he should blatantly have no quirk. And it's surprising that Izuku even flew. He questions Inko as she says, yes, doctor, he flew in front of me. He like even managed to fly through an entire building. And, you know, the doctor looks back at her and goes, very interesting. Well, we've never seen something like this. It might just be a new streamlined version of quirks. But until we fully know, I guess we'll just have to give his quirk some random name. Izuku doesn't think, and he just says like, oh, whatever you guys think it should be called. The doctors then tell him not to rush this process, seeing as it's going to be the name he'll have forever, so he can take his time to think about it, but to come back one day when he's ready, or when he discovers more about this said quirk, once they find more things out, seeing as by the test that they deducted, they were not able to see any quirks from Izuku being displayed whatsoever. So Izuku just goes back to school and tells everybody that his quirk is to fly. They all begin asking him if that's true, and once Izuku tries to show that it is true, and he's not able to perform, everybody just looks at him and laughs, and they begin to essentially picking on him, telling him that he's a liar, and they begin to call him High Flyer Deku, as or they begin to call him like Deku or like liar or something in Japanese, right? And Izuku's pretty much called that for a couple of years. Let's say 3 years. So now Izuku's 7 years old, and Bakugo and his goons just continue picking on him. It's just teasing, pushing, shoving, the usual things. And Izuku, he can brush that off. But one day, Bakugo comes in, and Izuku would be reading one of his favorite mangas, Dragon Ball Z, right? He's reading, and he's just looking at one of the chapters, just flipping through these pages and feeling excited because, Gohan was about to fight for what was right and essentially defeat Cell. And, they just did the double hand Kamehameha because let's just say that the Dragon Ball Z universe is a thing here just because, like, I don't know, like, just go with it, all right? So basically, what ends up pretty much happening is that when Bakugo goes towards Izuku, he pretty much blasts the comic that was in his hand, or sorry, the manga that was in his hand, and Izuku turns back to Bakugo to ask him what that was for. Bakugo tells him that he shouldn't be so interested in nerdy things like that, especially since he should be more preoccupied about not having a quirk. Izuku then gets up and then thinks back to what Gohan would have done, and he thinks that Gohan would not have let this slide, regardless of how weak he was. He would have put his fists up and fought. But Izuku can't help but be scared. I mean, Bakugo has a quirk and he doesn't. Or if he does, he's not even able to use it. Izuku doesn't even think he even has a quirk at this point, just because of the sheer fact that he hasn't been able to use it in so long that Izuku just gave up hope. Inko still believes because she saw Izuku do this. But Izuku, he'd begun losing hope after all this time. But one thing would essentially lead to another, and Izuku after this would essentially get shoved by one of the other goons of Bakugo. They would begin to essentially shove him around inside the circle until Izuku would finally break and shout out to the heavens, telling them to stop. When Izuku does this, Bakugo looks towards the direction of Izuku and chuckles. He's like, what are you gonna do about it? You think you're the main character, kid? You think you're about to get some crazy power up by screaming at us? Well, guess what, Izuku? You're not. That's not how the real world works. And his eyes just begin slowly fading from like a strange green color to more of a turquoise color, right? And Bakugo looks at Izuku and is like, hey yo, pause, give me a moment. He looks at Izuku and the cafeteria begins shaking, right? Izuku begins shaking the area entirely, and Bakugo was just like, there is no way. There's literally no way Izuku is, and his hair turns golden. Bam, it rises to the surface, and Bakugo was like, he's a Super Saiyan? Everybody looks at Izuku, and before they could know it, they all get knocked out and sent to the nurse's office by Izuku, who just tapped into some strange power. Izuku looks at his reflection through spilled water that was on the ground, and when he sees those eyes and the golden hair and the aura, Izuku was exhilarated. He's a Super Saiyan, for crying out loud. Who else gets a quirk that literally allows you to turn into a Super Saiyan? That's incredible, Izuku would be thinking. And suddenly Izuku would think that maybe he's a Saiyan, or maybe he just has a strange quirk that turns his eyes, that strange color and makes his hair golden. Maybe it's not a Super Saiyan, but something very, very close. So Izuku from this point on begins to essentially read more of this Dragon Ball manga, and essentially begins reading the portion where Gohan explains to Videl how to fly. And for the following 2 years, Izuku spends his entire days meditating, trying to channel his ki, and not really being able to get a good grasp of it, seeing as he doesn't have a teacher. So he's just doing things on his own, right? Izuku suddenly would finally float off the ground. And when he does this, he just thinks that he knew he could fly, right? He begins slowly levitating. And after this, a couple months would go by that Izuku would finally get a good grasp over this. Suddenly, we would basically have it to where Izuku essentially ends up just kind of talking to Bakugo, right? Like talking to Bakugo one day, and Bakugo would actually end up asking him if he's like some sort of Super Saiyan or something. Izuku tells him that it's highly unlikely, that it's probably just a quirk that looks similar but isn't the same thing. Bakugo says he thought as much and tells Izuku that he's sorry for everything that he pulled on him back in those days. Izuku says to just leave it in the past and move on, and Bakugo tells him right. He then goes off to just listen to the teacher, and suddenly Izuku and Bakugo are both like 9 years old, right? You know, they're like, let's just say 10, right? Let's say 10, and they both kind of got over their differences. Bakugo kind of respects Deku. Deku doesn't respect Bakugo, but he knows he's strong, so he just doesn't really say nothing. And we basically have this thing where Deku just over time is just learning to control his powers. Over the next 4 years, Izuku would learn how to shoot out ki blasts, and his ki would begin growing very rapidly, seeing as he trains every single day. And the things that he would do would gradually become more and more insane. He started off with weighted training, and then suddenly essentially began to do like thousands of push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups and stuff like that, and eventually get way more powerful, just striving to become as powerful as All Might. His ki would eventually grow to the point where essentially Izuku would finally end up amassing such a large ki that other entities around the universe that have the ability to, well, sense ki are actually able to acknowledge Izuku's strange like existence, right? Because I'm just going to be putting it out like this. Let's just say that the world that Izuku's currently in is like a modernized, more future version, and like let's just say that this is universe 6, right? Let's say that this is universe 6, and the reason that they have like this manga of Dragon Ball Z is because a person from universe 7 came to universe 6 and just wrote the story of Dragon Ball Z, right? In some strange way, shape, and form, right? And essentially, what ends up pretty much going down is Izuku continues training and training and training. And yes, because this is Universe 6, things go a bit different. This is after, planet Earth was restored and Goku and Vegeta would long be dead, so would Gohan. So even if he was to go to Universe 7, he wouldn't meet them. He would, however, be able to meet Vegeta, who's now the god of destruction of Universe 7. And, Beerus already retired and stuff like that. So, yeah. Anyways, though, what would essentially end up happening following this situation is Izuku just continues to train every single day until eventually we get to the point in time where Izuku would essentially be underneath some strange alleyway thing. He's walking with his backpack pretty happy, just scrolling by, and Izuku just trying to make his way to his house as fast as possible, seeing as it's his mother's birthday. Izuku would be doing so, and when he does this, a gigantic green sludge-like creature would lunge up to the surface and say, "Give me your body, kid. I didn't know that freak was in town." Izuku looks towards the direction of the sludge villain and is like, "What? What are you doing here?" And the sludge villain would essentially lunge at the direction of Izuku, who would hold one hand out and say, "Nah," as he shoots his a ki blast at the direction of the sludge villain, essentially incinerating a huge part of the sludge, as the sludge would be shocked, thinking that hurt a ton. It then tries to essentially lunge onto Izuku with what little strength it has, and Izuku would chuckle as Izuku pretty much goes into his Giga Chad mode and goes straight into Super Saiyan. Right now, he's able to do it at will. Izuku, he has the aura around him, the sludge villain is splattered all over the walls, and Izuku's holding this strong pose as All Might comes out and says, "I am here?" He looks towards Izuku, who looks like a straight up Super Saiyan, and All Might is like, "Kid, what kind of a crazy quirk do you have? Are you real?" And Izuku looks at the direction of All Might before saying, "Oh, All Might?" He then immediately begins to fangirl. And essentially, and yes, I do mean fangirl, not fanboy. His voice gets so high, he is classified as a fangirl, right? Izuku looks back at All Might and is like, "All Might, All Might, he immediately begins freaking out, being like, All Might, I've waited so long to see you, like you're so awesome, right? And basically we end up having this situation where All Might is just shocked that Izuku is this powerful and looks the way that he does, because he knows what Dragon Ball is too. And it's just shocking this man. But All Might just looks back to Izuku and is like your power is incredible. And he ends up signing his notebook, jumping off, and pretty much offering one for all to Izuku, giving him his number, right? Izuku would of course decline this power just because he says that he doesn't need it and that somebody else, maybe a Quirkless kid, would actually have some use for it, saying that he's already gonna be heading towards UA someday, so it's better to give it to somebody who has a good heroic heart and maybe doesn't have the opportunity to become a hero currently. All Might thinks about that, and Izuku would just walk home thinking that he did something good, when suddenly something would teleport right next to him. And Izuku would be shocked as he sees these things that look similar to the Kais from Universe 7, but not quite. They're different in a way. And yes, it's a Supreme Kai, by the way. Now, this Supreme Kai would go by the name of, I don't know, I'll probably come up with a name by the time that part 2 comes up, but basically this Supreme Kai would look towards the direction of Izuku and tell him that he should come with him, that he's the Supreme Kai of Universe 6. And Izuku goes, hold on, backtrack. What? You're a Supreme Kai? Universe 6? What are you talking about? There's universes? And the Kai would just look towards the direction of Izuku and tell him that there's no time to explain right now. Izuku says he can't go today, that it's his mom's birthday, and the Kai would say, why not just take his mom along? So they Kai to the direction of Inko's house and take them to the world of the Kaioshin, where Izuku just begins looking around and there's all the moons like all over the place, and Izuku is just like dumbstruck. He's like, I've only seen this in manga. No way, this can't be real. Izuku looks towards the direction of the Kaioshin and is like, am I dreaming? Like, Mom, pinch me. His mom pinches him and he's like, I'm not dreaming. Suddenly, he then looks towards the direction of the sword. Well, it's not the sea sword, but it's a different sword, right? And Izuku asks if he can wield it. He tries to pick it up, but he's far too weak at this moment. And the Supreme Kais would look towards the direction of Izuku as they tell him that long ago, in their parallel universe, there used to be these beings known as Saiyans. And even in their universe, there were beings known as Saiyans as well, but they all died out due to time, and they ended up actually getting into a combat with a very, very powerful being from Universe 6 that took the efforts of everybody to defeat, saying that he might come back someday, that currently they have no idea where the whereabouts of this individual is, but that Izuku essentially has to train to someday be able to defeat this individual, saying that they're not sure when it'll come back, but it will someday. And just to preface this, it's like a Majin being, right? It's like a Majin type creature by a being known as Dabidi or something like that, right? But anyways, what basically Dabidi. Okay, anyways, but basically what ends up happening is Izuku, after hearing this, he ends up asking if they're gonna train him. And they would nod and go on to essentially look at him before saying, precisely, young warrior. So, let's get started. We continue our story exactly where we left off yesterday. I mean, Izuku's pretty much been training in the planet of the Kais for what? Let's just pick off with, say, 7 months. Let's say Izuku's been training with the Kais for about 7 months. At this current point in time, Izuku has pretty much learned about Super Saiyan 2 and has actually learned to access it, just due to the fact that transforming in the Universe 6 Saiyan biology, even though Izuku is not exactly a real Saiyan, since he was born in Universe 6, the rules kind of apply to him. So basically what I'm gonna have happen is Izuku essentially goes on to master Super Saiyan 2 over these next 7 months. And with these next 7 months, Izuku was able to train with that said sword that I had mentioned previously. Not to mention, Izuku was actually able to essentially end up meeting the Great Elder, like the one that ends up unlocking Gohan's potential in Universe 7. Pretty much something like that, except the Universe 6 parallel of that, right? Now, obviously the Kai ends up doing the unlocking ritual for the potential for Izuku, and this would lead Izuku to actually lose the ability to transform into a Saiyan or Super Saiyan 2. Essentially, all that Izuku's gonna be having access to now is pretty much just going to be mystic form. And it's not gonna be Beast Gohan quite yet, or Beast Deku in this sense, because, you know, he's still not at that level quite yet. But Izuku is going to pretty much begin to get very, very powerful very, very quickly now from the story. Izuku's ki mastery would have pretty much gone through the roofs, and Izuku also knows a Kai technique known as the Kai Kai, where he basically is able to just simply teleport all over the place, similar to the instant transmission technique that Goku would have learned in Yardrat. So basically, to summarize everything up that Izuku would have learned, is basically he became about as strong as Gohan would be, let's say, on during the Cell Saga. No, during the Majin Buu Saga. Because if he's going to have Gohan's potential, I can't have Deku just be held back just due to the fact that the MHA universe is pretty weak. It's going to be a Deku goes around pretty much slaughtering every single villains in this series. So, you know, definitely be on the lookout for that. But basically what's going to be happening here is I essentially picture Izuku having somewhat comparable power levels to what Gohan would have by the, you know, Buu Saga, just due to the fact that he's been training and, you know, he's been talking to the Kais under Supreme Kai supervision. And currently it's about a couple of months off from when Champa would wake up and probably go visit the Kais, you know, to see what's going on, and then ultimately meet Izuku. But since that point still hasn't arrived yet, Izuku's basically just there, you know, doing his best to try to train, and essentially about 3 more months would go by when suddenly Izuku and his mother would finally be teleported back to Earth to stay permanently this time, right? Because obviously Inko comes every now and then, but Izuku's mainly the one who gets Kai-Kai'd from Earth back to the Kaioshin realm, right? And that's just a cycle that would repeat itself over the 10 months. So instead of Izuku cleaning up Dagoma Beach, we would have another character like, let's say, who in Class 1A would be a good fit? Let's give One For All to some random character and say that this kid was a lot like All Might when he was growing up. So he has One For All, and yeah. Because why not, right? So the inspiration came from Izuku telling him, maybe give it to a Quirkless kid. So it went to a Quirkless kid, meaning that they'll be able to actually get the full usage out of One For All, which, you know, that's a bonus. But overall, Izuku is able to essentially just go to the UA entrance exam and pretty much ace it. I mean, when it comes to the written portion, Izuku is a very intelligent individual, so I don't really see him struggling too much there. Let's just highball him and say that he gets like a high B or a low C, and that's going to be the score that he gets for the entrance exam. And when it comes to, well, what happens after that, which is pretty much the robot portion, I don't really think I need to be telling you guys too much about what would go down. I mean, it's Izuku with Gohan's potential. You put 2 and 2 together and you pretty much get Izuku going through this area, flying, blasting ki all over the place, and pretty much using abilities to the point where, if to everybody else who's watching, it literally just looks like Gohan is flying around the place with green hair floating up and like a mystic like aura. People begin to question like where he got this power from, and Izuku just says, you know, he's been training and that's just what his quirk works like. I mean, he's not really responsible for having his power take this much after the Dragon Ball universe, but this is just what it is. Obviously, he doesn't tell them that they're actually living in said parallel universe to the actual original canon story, because, you know, I don't think anyone's ready for that quite yet. But Izuku essentially ends up passing the test overall, and eventually he would end up getting his acceptance letter following about 1 week later. The next Monday would finally roll around and Izuku would finally find himself in the classroom, when suddenly Aizawa goes on to pretty much tell everybody to report outside. Bakugo looks to Deku. As they're in the changing room, you know, he takes off his shirt, he looks at him and asks him how much stronger he's gotten over the last 10 months, saying that he'd been pretty much MIA for the last couple of, you know, months, that they should have probably trained together. Izuku tells Bakugo that he's going to be shocked by the power he's going to display when he finally begins using it. And Bakugo says, I don't doubt it, dude. You were already more than powerful enough to become a hero before. I'm just excited to see how much stronger you could have gotten in this time. Izuku looks to Bakugo and says, oh, trust me, a lot stronger. Now, what goes on to happen here is we basically get this moment where Izuku is the one who actually has the ball thrown to him. You know, he catches it and he asks what he's supposed to be doing with this. Aizawa looks back at him and is like, I want you to throw it as far as you can, all right? Don't hold back on me. Izuku looks to Aizawa, pretty much nods, and then looks up at the sky before, you know, closing his eyes and just tossing it without even transforming. I mean, the dude just literally throws it up into the air and it causes a sonic boom as the ball just goes into outer space, and Aizawa would show that it marked infinity because it went into space and it just began floating forever, never landing. So technically that is infinity. Following this, they then get into the other tests that were pretty much just the 50-meter dash, the grip strength test, the side-to-side jumps, the other, you know, things that they would have obviously done, the standing long jump. We have the punching machine, which they actually added this time, that Deku shatters, because I don't know, I just really wanted to have that parallel there. So, you know, the punching machine is there, Izuku shatters it with one punch, and everybody is just shocked at how Izuku's performing. I mean, this dude is literally putting up One Punch Man levels performance on crack, because the dude is flying at the long jump, he's using his super speed, or not even super speed, but just basic human speed that he uses without even going into his mystic form to complete and absolutely shatter every single record that All Might would have previously had. I mean, Izuku's base form is now at such a level that it's just impossible for anybody on Earth to even catch up to Izuku, much less catch him off guard, because his perception is just so sped up by how fast Izuku can move. His battle speed is incredible. It's beyond the level of any Earthling that currently exists at the moment, and seeing as one of the only other individuals in the universe that actually has ki is lying dormant in some wasted planet somewhere, there's nobody whatsoever to stand up to Deku. So basically, what ends up happening is Izuku goes on to ace the thing, right? There's no reason for Izuku to fail. And eventually, the following day, he finds himself stuck in class in between Mineta and Kaminari, who are both pretty much just like, so Izuku, what's your quirk like? Like, how does your quirk work like that? Like, your powers, they're incredible. You can shoot ki blast? And, you know, Izuku just looks at them and he's like, yeah, like, it's pretty strange. I really don't know what my power is called. But, you know, Mineta goes, well, you can use like anime powers, so you could call it like Toon Force or something like that. Izuku looks to Mineta and is like, dude, that's for cartoons. Mineta's like, oh right, manga force? And Izuku hears that and is just like, oh, how about I just call it ki? Mineta looks at him and goes, oh, that's a cool name too. You know, you could just call your quirk ki. And then he asks him why he's never had a quirk. Izuku goes on to explain that when he was growing up, he had such a hard time controlling it that he didn't even know he had a quirk, until eventually he met his master and he began training him and finally being able to control it in a very competent manner, and that before he was kind of just flaring his strength all over the place, saying that now that he's finally had some, you know, what's the word? Wow, that snuck up on me. But anyways, he basically says that once he had some guidance, he was finally able to reach his untapped potential, which is quite literally, considering the fact that he has the mystic form that literally is just a potential, like, bringing form that gives people their one and only true potential, whatever it is that they have, right? So eventually the day would come when Izuku has to come back to class, and when he's in class, he would essentially just be waiting for what to do. The day was a pretty boring one, so nothing was really going on, and suddenly All Might just busts into the classroom like, I am here, coming into the room like a normal person. Izuku looks to All Might and immediately gets excited to see him once again, and then All Might reveals the costumes and tells them that they're going to be getting into 2v2 battles, heroes versus villains. Izuku is actually teamed up with Bakugo, and their opponents are actually Mineta and Momo. So when they both heard that, they immediately just thought, well, that's going to be easy. But this time around, Izuku's going to be a villain, right? So Izuku's going to be a villain, Bakugo is as well. And, you know, they're both at the bomb room. They're going to just be chilling, waiting for Momo and Mineta to come. Mineta would be terrified, being like, I don't want to fight against Izuku. Like, please, no. All Might just tells Mineta, like, don't worry, Izuku will be holding back. That they've already discussed that with him, saying that, you know, Izuku won't just be... Oh, God. Wow, this is not okay. I keep yawning. I'm so sorry, guys. But he would basically tell Mineta that Izuku's not just going to be flaring his power all over the place, that Izuku's going to be using his strengths controlled in a positive manner. That way nobody gets seriously injured. Mineta looks at All Might and goes, seriously injured? So what you're saying is I'm going to get injured either way, but I'm not going to get seriously injured. And All Might goes, precisely, young man. Suddenly Mineta pretty much passes out, and we basically have Mineta be replaced with All Might, who joins Momo, and they're both going to be on the hero team. All Might goes on to tell the students that, to try their best and to try to be the best villains they could be, but not to be too disheartened if they lose. Bakugo and Deku both look at each other, laugh, knowing that Izuku himself could probably take on All Might, and Izuku just says, I'll flatter All Might, I guess. He proceeds to then think about what an honor this is going to be, because he's going to be fighting his childhood idol. I mean, it's incredible that he gets a chance to fight against All Might. Like, it's rare. It's something he never thought would be possible. And basically what ends up happening following this little situation is essentially, how do I put this? Essentially, All Might comes busting in, right? He smashes a hole through the door and he immediately looks towards the bomb before rushing towards it as Bakugo comes flying in and shoots an explosion. All Might doesn't care. He catches Bakugo with one arm and throws him between the building. And then suddenly Deku comes in and pretty much ends up coming behind All Might before he was able to pretty much grab the bomb, grab him by the leg and swing him out of the building. As Izuku looks to Bakugo and tells him to make sure that Momo doesn't touch the bomb. Bakugo says he got it, and suddenly he would begin flaring explosions as he simply stays in the bomb room and waits for Momo to essentially begin trying something. She doesn't actually end up trying something, smart choice, because Bakugo was there and she knows she was going to get absolutely folded. I mean, she tries it, but she gets captured in the capture tape relatively easily, and Izuku's just outside facing All Might, just thinking to himself how much of an honor this is going to be, as All Might cracks his knuckles and says, well, seems to me like I won't actually need these restraints. He takes off these 500-pound weight things that he has on each arm and leg and immediately begins to stretch as he looks at Izuku and says, your move, kid. But before we can actually get into that, first, we have to get into the sponsor of today's video, which is actually going to be SomeSlight Clothing and Fandom. Now, obviously, two sponsors, kind of weird. The first sponsor is for anime shorts and anime apparel. In case you guys are looking for some dope comfy shorts, they're made out of mesh. They have tons of anime designs. I'm going to pop some up on screen. And the other one is essentially Fandom, which you guys can go to by clicking on the other link down below in my description, and it will take you guys to their My Hero page or their other page that they sell normal merch. They specialize in selling shirts, hoodies, and overall jean jackets and other designs such as that. So if you guys were to do your boy a big favor and click on their website and go browse the things that they have to offer, I would truly appreciate it, seeing as any purchases will actually greatly help the channel and they'll help you guys out, seeing as you guys are actually going to be getting something out of it and not just throwing money away. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, your boy only makes like $2 off each purchase, but it's like, it helps a little bit. Anything really helps, right? But yeah, that said, let's get back into the what if. So obviously, now we end up getting to the segment of the video where Izuku's pretty much trying to throw hands with All Might, right? And All Might looks back at Izuku and says, well, young man, you certainly have come a long way from the last time I saw you. Izuku stretches and says, honestly, All Might, to me, it seems like you haven't actually come much of a long way. If anything, it seems like you've gotten a bit weaker, as a smile creeps up on Izuku's face and he closes his eyes and opens them, snapping into his mystic form as he suddenly appears behind All Might, and All Might turns around in shock as Deku punches All Might straight through 4 buildings, and All Might just gets up dizzy, like he's like, what? He looks up and Izuku's standing right in front of him, looking him dead in the eyes as Izuku says, night night, All Might, as he then goes in to throw a punch, but he stops it halfway and says, you really think I would do that to you, All Might? I've loved you since I was a kid. I have adored you for years. I could never do that to the symbol of peace or my hero. All Might looks stunned at Izuku and he questions what he's doing. Izuku then comes in to whisper something in All Might's ear, something that nobody else could have heard. And he tells All Might that essentially he's gonna let All Might beat him, like just act as if it was all fake and like beat my cheeks in, All Might. I need you to. All Might immediately goes on to absolutely ram Izuku. Just kidding. No, seriously, All Might pretty much proceeds to stand up and laugh, be like, young Izuku, punching Izuku straight into a building, and then Izuku just acts unconscious. Following this, everybody who was watching the fight from the monitors calms down just slightly, and they then think, oh, good, All Might was just playing. I mean, I really was starting to think that he was stronger than All Might. I mean, if that was the case, then what's the point of him even being in the hero course if you're stronger than All Might himself? Suddenly, Izuku wakes up and Recovery Girl, fake wakes up, and Recovery Girl goes on to ask Izuku, how he healed so fast. Izuku says healed. He then chuckles and says he was never hurt in the first place, as All Might walks in with his weak form and goes on to explain everything to Izuku, essentially telling him that yeah, he was absolutely right about him getting weaker, saying that the reason for that is because he got injured, that potentially if he was at his prime and 100% healthy, he probably could have put a better fight up against Izuku, but they'll never get to see how that would go down. Izuku looks at All Might and says, oh, All Might, about that, don't even worry. I would have won either way. I was tremendously holding back. All Might looks at Izuku and is like, what do you mean? And Izuku looks at him dead in the eyes and goes, I could blow this planet up, All Might. I was really holding back. All Might looks at Izuku and asks him if he's joking. And Izuku holds one hand out to the sky, right? Like out the window, and shoots a ki blast so powerful that it literally goes on to just like explode a far away like meteor, and just bam, like the entire like sky just lights up, and everybody sees that and they're like, what was that? And Izuku looks back to All Might and he's like, all right, noted. From here, Izuku then goes on to look towards the direction of All Might and tell him that, if it's really that bad, he can actually have him healed by some friends of his. All Might looks at Izuku and asks him what he's talking about, and Izuku tells All Might to hold on to his hand. All Might does so, and suddenly Izuku would go on to say, Kai Kai, as suddenly he teleports himself and All Might to the planet of the Kais, with both of them just looking at the direction of him and asking him, what he's doing there. Izuku looks at them and goes on to say that basically this is his friend from Earth, he's a very powerful man, and that he has this bad injury. He lifts up his shirt and immediately they're like, oh yeah, that's true, let's fix that up for you. Suddenly they put their magic, they begin to heal All Might, and suddenly All Might feels reinvigorated. All Might feels fully healthy again, and All Might looks to Izuku and asks him like how he could ever repay him. Izuku tells All Might that he could repay him by simply continuing to do hero work and being an incredible teacher that he knows he could be, and also making sure to train up a bit, saying that there's definitely room for improvement for All Might's battle skills and stuff like that. As he then thanks the Kais and holds onto All Might's back as he then puts his hand to his head and goes, Kai Kai. And suddenly we basically have Izuku teleporting back to where they were, with Recovery Girl asking, what that was. Izuku says that it was a sort of teleportation technique that he learned from gods, and she looks at him like with a funny expression, and Izuku says, I'm not kidding. Suddenly he walks out and All Might goes on to explain that he got fully healed. All Might, after explaining this, goes on to pretty much bow to Izuku and thank him for everything, going on to offer one for all, well, not offer it, but pretty much tell Izuku that he would have offered it to him if he didn't already pick a successor thanks to his suggestion. And Izuku looks at him and says, oh right, yeah, you already offered it to me, All Might, remember? And All Might is like, right, Midoriya, if you change your mind, I definitely could have. Izuku says, don't worry about it, All Might, remember, just keep being the great hero I know you are, and protect the community, right? All Might smiles and just thinks about how great Izuku is, and the dude just comes back to class. They have about 1 week's worth of worthless things. I mean, there's really nothing to go over. It's nothing special, nothing really incredible. I mean, Izuku's practically just chilling. Let's see. So there's really nothing going on, if I'm being quite honest with you guys. I mean, we pretty much just have Izuku in class, you know, getting to know his teammates until eventually the day would come, however, with the incident that Ida was able to be like, guys, it's just news reporters, right? And he floats into the air. That happens. He's appointed a class rep. And suddenly we find ourselves on the day of the actual USJ villain attack. Now, obviously, the USJ villain attack isn't exactly going to be the greatest thing in the world in this story, just because remember, Izuku has powers comparable to that of like Buu levels of power. It's incredible. So Izuku pretty much goes towards the direction of where the and by Buu levels of power, I don't mean like Majin Buu, I mean like the lower tiers, like say like Super Saiyan 2 Goku, yeah, something like that. He'd be like that strong, not Super Saiyan 3 or actual Mystic Gohan or even Vegito, right? More like Super Saiyan 2 Goku in his Mystic form, because you know he hasn't had a reason to be pushed that far quite yet, and he still hasn't learned God Ki because he hasn't met Champa or any of that stuff. But all will come in due time. Trust the process, boys. Trust the process. Anyways, though, so basically what ends up happening is we essentially have 13 going over all of the rules of the USJ and explaining that quirks can be very useful, but they can also be very detrimental to yourself and your surroundings. So be careful and make sure to be responsible with your quirks. After this, she basically just goes on to tell the class to essentially get into groups, and as she's doing this, a strange purple mist would pretty much pop up in the USJ. And how do I explain this? The purple mist pretty much pops up into the USJ and goes on to be like, sorry, we weren't invited, heroes, but we decided to crash the party. As suddenly in an instant, like multiple villains began to pop up all over the USJ, and Kurogiri just teleports everyone away. As you know, we then see Bakugo and Kirishima jump into Kurogiri and get warped away to their original areas, as well as Izuku would. Even he would actually get caught off guard by this. But when he's actually teleported to the area and, you know, he begins falling into the water, Izuku flies and zooms over to Tsuyu and Mineta, catching the both of them as he goes up into the air and pretty much lets out his ki aura flow, like just out, as the water that was in the area that they were in just pretty much shoots everywhere all over the USJ, and it essentially like goes shooting out like a tsunami, like kind of like a water storm, but not like a tsunami at the same time. I don't know how to explain it, but basically all the villains get caught up in the water, and Izuku's free to actually rush towards Aizawa, who is having to fight like a solid amount of villains if you really think about it. Because think about it, Aizawa had a ton of villains to his left, to his right, behind him, pretty much had villains surrounding him, and he was just throwing the hands with the scarf, canceling quirks left and right, and beating the mess out of these kids. So with Izuku coming in, he would definitely be able to take the blunt of most of these villains out very easily by simply shooting small ki blasts at the directions of these villains, very weak ones that wouldn't like kill them, but it would injure them more than enough, right? Like more than enough to knock them out, right? And after doing this, Izuku basically looks to Aizawa and tells him that he needs his help taking out the big bad. Aizawa looks at him and tells him that he needs his help. Izuku goes on to say, yeah. And then Aizawa just goes, yeah, right, kid. You can't fool me. Maybe everybody else, but you definitely let All Might win that fight. Suddenly, you know, Aizawa just looks to Izuku, nods his head, and Izuku rushes towards Shigaraki as suddenly the Nomu stands in front of him with his chest out, like standing much taller than Izuku. I wish I could paint this picture for you guys like better, but the Nomu's just tall, and Izuku looks up, you know, he looks up kind of like, imagine you're trying to fight somebody and then like boom, they come out and they're like 7 feet tall, they're huge and they're like muscular. You look at them and you're like, yo, I take back everything I said. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the situation Izuku finds himself in. But he looks at the Nomu and he's like, am I supposed to be scared of you? Suddenly Izuku uppercuts the Nomu out of the USJ and looks at Kurogiri and Shigaraki, who are both like very close to each other, and just grabs Shigaraki by the shirt as Shigaraki tries to pretty much decay Izuku, but Izuku grabs Shigaraki by the arms, like the wrists, and just crushes in. So Shigaraki's unable to move his hand. He then goes on to grab Shigaraki's arms and bam, just snap him like a little twig, and then tells Shigaraki that if he enjoys being a villain and causing harm to others, then maybe he'll enjoy harm being caused to him. As Shigaraki just kind of like utters like a word of pain just for a second, and suddenly Izuku just kind of throws Shigaraki at Aizawa, and Aizawa begins to essentially use the erasure quirk on Kurogiri, which basically makes it so that he's unable to warp out of there. I'm not sure if Aizawa was able to cancel his quirk 100%, but let's just say that for this certain situation, he is. This means that Shigaraki and Kurogiri would actually be captured way earlier than they would be in the original, and essentially this actually would leave room for more of the other threats to be handled easier. But since the USJ is pretty much only really the Shigaraki, the Nomu, and Kurogiri as the big three threats, since that's pretty much been taken care of, I don't see any reason for us to stay on the USJ arc. So we're kind of just going to be jumping into the actual sports festival arc, which I think we're probably going to be able to get through in the next 5 minutes. Maybe not, but we'll see how time goes. There's probably going to be one more, if not two more parts after this, because this one's going to be a 15-minute video, just because your boy has been busy lately, so these videos have been cut down a little bit, but it's all good, right? You guys still get entertained, so should be fine. And if you're watching this in the movie version, definitely make sure to go down below and comment hashtag movie or something like this, or hashtag or if you're a new sub, comment hashtag new sub or something like that, right? Just to let me know. Like, I'll definitely see your comment, like it, you know, if it's in the first 2 days, probably. But anyways, what basically ends up happening following this small interaction with Izuku and the villains is we jump into the situation where they're all finding themselves in the actual sports festival. Obviously, they come out from the tunnel dressed up in their dope like little sports festival outfits, and they look up to just stare at everybody who's cheering, and you know, Midnight's like, "Are you ready?" You know, everybody's getting hype, and Izuku just smiling, thinking about the prospect of taking part in this USJ event, that it's incredible and how much fun it's probably going to be to take place in these events. So basically, Izuku gets called up to make the speech. He does so, and eventually they get into the race portion of the video, which I'm not even going to bother going over because I'm pretty sure you guys already know who's going to win. Obviously Mineta, right? No, seriously, Deku's going to win. And as for the cavalry battles, I don't cover them because I just think they're really boring. So I'm just going to skip it. Just know that everybody who wins in the original wins, all right? I'm sorry for any of you guys that are like, cavalry battles like my favorite part. I doubt those people even exist. But basically, we're just going to cut to the actual fights, like the meat and potato of the videos. And we're going to immediately jump into Deku versus Shinso. Now, Deku versus Shinso is going to be kind of interesting, because obviously we know that Deku has done a lot of ki training, a lot of mental training, a lot of just meditation with the Kais. So he's very in tune with his mind and body. So I don't see Izuku personally actually being caught up in a trick like Shinso's mind control. I mean, there's definitely a possibility, but I genuinely feel as though, just due to the fact that we were able to see that Vegeta was able to kind of combat the mind control that Babidi was trying to pretty much put him under, kind of gives me the feeling that Izuku, if he was to, you know, have enough resolve and, you know, flare his power up high enough, that Shinso wouldn't be able to actually take over Deku's mind. So I'm just going to be going under that assumption and saying that instead of Shinso being able to actually defeat Izuku with his mind control, I'm going to actually be saying that Shinso's unable to, just because of the simple fact that Izuku's too in tune with his mind, body, and, you know, connection, and the fact that Izuku's just so overpowered that it would take a greater finesse and control over his quirk to actually work on Izuku. That said, Izuku gets away with the win here after he's able to dodge that, and Shinso's like, what? But suddenly he just gets hit in the gut, and just all of his like life just drains out of Shinso's eyes as he falls and just gets completely knocked unconscious like a beta male, right? Suddenly Izuku finds himself in the ring fighting against Todoroki, and you know, Todoroki looks at Izuku and tells him that he's gonna defeat him with nothing but half of his power. Izuku, hearing this, is like, Are you hearing yourself? Todoroki's like, I am, and I'm gonna do it, you know what I mean? Like, he immediately tries to shoot ice geysers at the direction of Deku, and Deku just kind of laughs. Like, could you imagine if you're way stronger than somebody, right? Like let's say, let me put this into perspective, right? Let's say your little brother thinks he can beat you, but with one arm. Could you imagine how funny that would be? Like, they come up to you and genuinely believe that they can beat you up with one arm. That's how funny Izuku finds it. So when he sees this from Todoroki, he's like, that's cute. And he is immediately able to pretty much just dust on Todoroki. It's not even a contest how easy Izuku was able to defeat him. Suddenly, we jump into the battle between the kid that actually has the power of One for All and Izuku. And since this kid was also quirkless like Deku, I'm going to be saying that I'm going to be saying he had better control of One for All, so, you know, he was a bit more fit. So instead, he's going to have a good control over 20% of One for All, and that's why Bakugo loses to this kid, because, you know, he actually has the main character's power. But anyways, pushing that aside, we basically get into the final battle, which is essentially just this random, like, OC character that I made up that is essentially just going to be facing off against Izuku. They look at each other in the ring, and immediately Midnight goes, Hajime! As suddenly, both of them begin rushing towards each other's direction, and Izuku's able to end this all in one fell swoop, landing a consistent 50 blows on this kid before he even registered it, as he falls anime style, and then Midnight says, the winner, Izuku Midoriya! Immediately after this, Izuku looks up as he just stares at the crowd and hears all of this cheering. Immediately, he gets into this flashback where he begins to essentially see visions of when he was told he was quirkless and felt at his absolute lowest. Izuku opens his eyes once more and just sees the cheering people and smiling faces at the thought of him winning. And Izuku just smiles, not being able to help the fact that he's happy. He's content with his life. Izuku feels fulfilled. It's a great time for Izuku overall. And after this, we essentially end up jumping back into Classroom, where Izuku walks inside and Kaminari goes up to Deku and says, dude, your performance at the USJ, it was awesome. Seriously, I can't tell you enough how cool you look tapping into that strange power you have. Deku looks at Kaminari and tells him, you know, thank you for that, and goes on to essentially look at his classmates as they all they're like, congrats Izuku. Even Bakugo comes next to him and, you know, punches him in the arm and goes, yeah, you did good, loser. And suddenly from here he goes towards his desk, sits down, and Deku just pretty much goes towards the front of the classroom, letting All Might walk in and pretty much explain to them that pretty soon they're actually going to be having to pick their hero names and picking their very first intern experience with a real pro hero, giving them all a list to check before pretty much explaining to them that they all have about 24 hours to pick and that they have about 20 minutes to pick their hero names. Deku just looks at All Might and says, we have 20 minutes as high school kids to pick the hero name that will follow us for the rest of our lives. All Might's like, yeah, I picked All Might when I was around your age, kid, so don't stress too bad. I mean, most of the time your name that you pick is pretty cool, so don't worry about it. Midnight walks in and she looks towards the direction of Deku and she winks at him, and Deku's just like, he smiles, and she suddenly begins to essentially like go through everybody, pretty much explaining their names, being like, I like it, I don't like it, try again, you know what I mean? Eventually everybody ends up picking their hero names, and we basically have Deku pick his hero name, which is essentially just going to be the pro hero Kami. No, I can't call him Kami, even though it sounds cool. Gohan, why not? Let's just call him Gohan. Pro hero Gohan or something. I don't know, just make up some cool name, all right? He basically makes up this really cool hero name, and following these little events that end up happening, all of them go on their internships. Now, obviously, we end up having a bit of a situation where Deku doesn't really know where he should internship, so he ends up pretty much going over to Nezu's office after all was said and done, and pretty much explaining to him that he'd rather intern with the Supreme Kais than with a regular superhero, saying that they are the guardians of the universe and that they're training training will be much more sufficient than the training of any pro hero here. Nezu looks at Izuku, drinks his tea and says, "Ah, yes Izuku, go ahead. I understand that you're already much stronger than anybody here, so the only thing you would really learn is experience. You could learn that later on when you're closer to graduating, so I understand. For this time, you can go train with whoever it is you said. Supreme Kaj, right?" Izuku looks back at Nezu and is like, "Right, sir." And Nezu just goes, yeah, look at my fur. It's so soft, right?" Izuku looks back at Nezu and he's like, "Thanks, sir." And suddenly Nezu tells him to stop before pretty much telling him that essentially he needs to, live up to the expectations of the teachers. Izuku nods his head, thinks to himself, what a cool guy, and suddenly walks away from Nezu's office. He then immediately walks back towards the class, and he goes on to pretty much grab his things before then looking to all of them and holding out a peace sign and saying, "Bye guys," before saying "Kai Kai," and going straight to the world of the Kais, where he essentially begins to train for about an entire week. Now obviously the successor of All Might is the one who goes off into the Hostu City incident, and I'm not even going to sugarcoat this. Ida still goes over there and gets very much hurt by Stain. He pretty much gets paralyzed, and since this random kid isn't the best friend of Ida like Deku is, he pretty much ends up actually getting pretty much paralyzed, never being able to become a hero again. But luckily this new kid with the OC power and like One for All is able to jump in and save Ida just in time before he could get killed, and then defeat Stain because now he has like 20% of full Cowling, which even Canon Izuku was able to put a good fight up against, and he only had about 5%. So now just imagine 20% full Cowling this random OC kid, right? Anyways though, regardless of that said fact, we're now going to be jumping into another situation that's going to be landing Izuku a bit closer to home. Now, Izuku would pre at the planet of the Kais when suddenly the Kais would essentially begin to get worried. They're looking through a crystal ball and notice that there's a threat in the universe, some strange being who's pretty much going around conquering planets and essentially not being very nice, right? So Izuku just uses his instant transmission ability, and the Kais tell him that this is going to be his first real mission. He immediately instant transmissions there, and once he does arrive, this being looks towards Izuku and tells him to get lost unless he wants to end like the rest of them. Suddenly, we then have Izuku looking towards this direction of like an ancestor, or like a not an ancestor, but like the next generation of the what was his name? Frieza, like the Frieza of Universe 6, right? Like the next generation of him. And Izuku looks to this man, and it's like he doesn't have the final form also, since they're weaker. And we basically have Izuku like looking at this dude, this tyrant, and essentially just looking at him and telling him that he better stop or he's gonna have to put an end to this. He tells him that he's funny for that before immediately lunging in and screaming, using his ki to essentially try to kill him in one fell swoop. But Izuku's able to easily dodge and get out of the way easily with finesse like no other. Eventually Izuku taps into his mystic form and begins to absolutely begin berating this man with punches, kicks, and ki blasts that are able to pretty much hold the other dude at bay. Suddenly he taps into his final form, and Izuku and this unknown individual known as Ice Cube, I'm just kidding, not Ice Cube, but Frozone or something like that, but like something like that, right? And like this dude just looks towards the direction of Deku, and they both begin just fighting and throwing hands. And Deku's actually getting pushed back. This dude is incredibly powerful, but Deku through this fight is actually learning as he goes. He's improving, and his anger is rising to the surface as he begins to be told about all the horrible things that this dude was actually doing to this planet and the planets beforehand. Izuku looks towards the direction of him and tells him that all that ends now, and that he's gonna be making sure that he never harms anybody ever again. He screams, and suddenly he lunges up into the air before yelling Masenko, shooting a giant energy blast at the direction of this being and pretty much eradicating him from existence, giving Deku a bit of a huge increase in his power, and also obliterating the villain tyrannical person that was in the universe just causing problems. Izuku Kakkai's back, noticing that he's pretty much late for school with his watch that he has on his wrist, and once he arrives, he gets to pretty much be told of Ida's death. Not only that, but also about how All Might is going to actually be holding like these final like races and final exams. Now when it comes to the race, they all do relatively easy. Deku wins, but when it comes to the finals, the written portion would be incredibly easy for Izuku, because I mean Izuku's pretty much learning knowledge of the actual universe, and he's a generally smart kid in general, plus he also has Gohan's intelligence stacked on top. So it's like pretty OP when it comes to how smart Izuku actually is. And then when it comes to his physical fight against All Might, I don't really think I need to tell you guys too much about this. We obviously saw a original fight between All Might in the second installment of this series, so I'm basically going to be saying that instead of having them both fight and, you know, just letting Izuku stomp All Might, instead of that, I'm actually going to be having it to where Izuku pretty much just ends up catching All Might off guard and just grabbing his partner, using Kai to make his way towards the finish line and walk right past it, beating All Might, who kind of knew he was going to lose, but, you know, he laughs and says he was careless. The class believes him, and Izuku goes on to pretty much enjoy the fruits of his labor, which is essentially being allowed into the forest training camp. Once they're all on the bus and, you know, they're all excited to make their way towards said training camp, all of them get there and suddenly Mandalay shoots them off the mountain, leading to Deku looking at all of them and saying that he doesn't really feel like walking through this mosquito infested forest, looking at them and asking if they feel like it. They would all nod aggressively, being like, not really, and Deku says, I thought so, before putting his hand on his forehead and saying, Kai, immediately making their way towards the direction of the actual tower area, and then telling them all to just relax until the actual teachers arrive, which was about 2 hours later on the bus. Once that happened, all of them were pretty much passed out sleeping, resting, and when Aizawa was pretty much like made his way outside, he began waiting for the class, just being like, okay, it's been 3 hours. It's been 4 hours. It's been 5 hours. And suddenly he's like, where are these kids? You know, he goes in to the forest to look for them and they're nowhere to be seen. He begins to get really worried and everyone's just sleeping. And suddenly, you know, Mandalay goes into one of the rooms to grab her coat or something like that. Or to just check if the kids are there. She sees that all of them are just knocked out on the bed sleeping, and she immediately like loses her cool and just uses her quirk on the students, making them all get afraid and jump up. And, you know, Aizawa was then immediately told the situation, leading to Aizawa actually scowling at Deku and telling him that they were supposed to do this on their own, saying he knows Izuku could have, but because he decided to do that, he's now going to get punished. So Izuku's now on punishment, and the rest of the class has to do it all over again in the nighttime, so it was a lot harder for them, but they managed, right? That being said, what pretty much ended up happening following this small situation is essentially we end up having the point in time in which Koda pretty much just ends up like helping the girls from Mineta by not letting them peek, pass out. Izuku catches them. He learns about Koda's backstory. And once he does learn about Koda's backstory, I see Izuku still being sympathetic. So nothing's really going to be changing until the muscular encounter, which is what I'm going to be jumping to. Izuku would sit down right next to Koda, going on to explain to him that he knows that it must be hard to not have his parents around, but telling him that he should be grateful that he has an aunt that really cares about him, and, you know, having a home, having a quirk, to count his blessings. Koda looks at him and tells him that what would he know about these things, saying that he's just some stuck-up pro hero like everyone else, that he's just gonna die someday anyways, just like his parents did, and that there's no reason for any of them to be here, that heroes are just a waste of time. Izuku looks towards Koda and is about to say something when suddenly Muscular reveals himself and is like, hey, I'm looking for Akatsuki Bakugo. Deku holds one hand towards the direction of Muscular as Koda turns around and just blasts him straight off the cliff, leading him to get completely knocked out. And Deku continues talking to Koda, telling him not to worry about that, as Koda just looks at Deku in shock, and Deku looks at him and tells him that he's been there before, in a point in time where he felt weak, useless. He felt as if the whole world was against him, back before he could finally control his quirk, and he thought he was quirkless for a while, telling Koda not to pretty much think about the bad but only the good, and telling Koda that there is maybe going to be an opportunity someday where Koda will actually get the chance to, you know, see things in a brighter light. saying that he's young, but someday he'll understand what he means. Suddenly, Izuku realizes that there's a bunch of key signatures, malicious ones, that he doesn't recognize, so he just uses the Kai to teleport to each one and pretty much dismantle them all individually. Moonfish, Muscular, pretty much Mr. Compress, Dobby, Spinner, all of those characters pretty much get mollywopped by Deku. Just imagine if Goku was in the Dragon Ball Z universe and just begun to, okay, let me instant transmission to this villain. Boop, I punched you once in the face, you're knocked out. Boop, 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 boop. That's pretty much what Deku did to all of these villains. And he did it so fast that once he ended up pretty much grabbing them all and wrapping them up in their restraints, Izuku was just like, alright, so what do we do now? All Might looks to Izuku and tells him that that was some efficient work. And Koda arrives only to see Deku had pretty much handled all those villains and is shocked at how powerful he is, starting to kind of look up to Deku and also realizing that one of those villains was the one who killed his parents. He looks to Deku and pretty much tells him thank you, that that's the guy that killed his parents. Deku gets a bit angry after hearing that, knowing that Muscular did something like that, but just says that he'll get what's coming to him in Tartarus, asking Koda if he wants to pay him back a little bit. Koda smiles and shoots a water beam at the direction of Muscular's other good eye, and he messes it up permanently, not blinding him, but, you know, kind of blurring his vision. And, you know, now Koda's happy, and, you know, he and Deku are on good terms now. And suddenly, now we just POV change to the direction of the police taking in all of the villains, when suddenly All For One appears and essentially begins to dismantle them all, killing them in essence, and taking all those villains that were pretty much held captive away, only to pretty much reveal them sometime later on. Deku is none the wiser of the situation, so school continues just like usual, and eventually they make their way towards the, the provisional license exam. Now I'm gonna keep it a buck with you guys. I hate this arc. I hate it so much. It's so boring. The stakes are so low. It doesn't matter. Deku's gonna win anyways. You all know that. So we're just gonna skip there, and then we're just gonna go straight to the internship arc with Mirio, right? The Mirio arc is going to be slightly boring, and when I say slightly, I'm sorry, guys. I mean very boring. I mean, obviously we have Mirio, this dope Giga Chad character who at the beginning was honestly super cool, but Horikoshi just mishandled him, I believe. So we're really just gonna have Deku curb stomp Mirio at the beginning, and then once he offers the internship with Tsunade, Izuku does accept, just because Mirio's so enthusiastic, and Izuku can tell that Mirio probably does want him to go. So Izuku, out of the kindness of his heart, ends up accepting Mirio's offer and pretty much telling him that he will happily go and, you know, do what he was pretty much asked by Mirio. Izuku then goes on to pretty much like just go in there, and when they run into Eri in the alleyway, Izuku knows that Overhaul's intentions aren't pure. So what does Izuku do? Izuku puts one hand on Overhaul and pretty much Kai's him into a random planet, telling him that jail is not good enough for somebody like him who dares hurt a little girl for research. As he says, "You're not Jiraiya, bro. Calm down." He then leaves, and Overhaul is just stranded on this planet. And we're just going to be saying that it's a planet similar to Vampa, and that Overhaul dies like literally 2 days after because he has no water and he has to fight against these giant beasts. And it's just funny. But what ends up happening following this situation is we essentially just have this moment where Izuku is kind of just going through everything so easily that there's really no point in pointing any of that stuff out. Eventually, though, we make it to the point where about 4 years would pass, and this is when the villain that I brought up in like the second episode is actually going to pop back into existence. The villain known as like a random Majin creature, right? He finally wakes up from his slumber and is awoken by another magical wizard, right? And we basically have this moment where Izuku's now currently a pro hero, and he's been doing his thing for a couple of years now. He's been performing great in the hero society, and Deku has just been doing his thing, going toe to toe with some of the strongest villains in the world, like every single day. But even they are not able to put a fight up. Essentially, Izuku like goes from the planet of the Kais to his home to work every single day, and that's the cycle. He's been training for years, and yes, eventually he did end up meeting Champa, which was actually a pretty funny encounter because when Champa found out that they had an apprentice Supreme Kai, he was actually quite shocked, saying that he reminds him a lot of this one Saiyan from Universe 7. Izuku asks if it was Gohan, and Champa says something like that. He then asks him to go train on the planet of, the Destroyer, and Izuku goes over there and actually ends up mastering God Ki, which is actually extremely impressive. And because he's able to actually manage to learn God Ki, he's able to actually stack Mystic Form on top of God Ki, making this strange, like, what does white and red create? It creates pink, making this strange, like, pink God form that Izuku now has complete full access to. Because of his Mystic Form being something easily tapped into, it really doesn't create much of a problem for Izuku to stack both of them on each other. So by the time that this brand new creature and being comes back, Izuku is more than ready to handle him, or so he thinks. We immediately have Izuku being informed of the Kais rushing in after informing him that one of the Kais actually died, Izuku's master. The apprentice was the only one that was able to escape, and after Izuku hears this, he is angry. He uses the Kai and returns back to that said planet, and once he arrives, the wizard looks at his Majin creature and tells him to essentially kill the brat. Deku looks at this Majin-like creature and says that he's not going to let him get away with that, as he lunges in, charging his ki up, and shoots 3 ki blasts at his direction. His foe just dodges out of the way and goes in to throw an uppercut, as Deku is sent flying into a crater, and he suddenly taps into his Mystic Form, lunging in and throwing a barrage of furious punches and kicks that are just causing his opponent to pretty much begin backtracking, falling back slowly, as Izuku thinks that there's no way that this dude could keep up with him at this state. Suddenly, the Majin creature smiles as Deku shoots a blast that eradicates his top half as it just regenerates, and Izuku's never seen anything like this before or been informed, so Izuku, after seeing that, is just shocked at how powerful this thing is, and Izuku's able to essentially do this thing where he pretty much just goes on to continue trying to use his Mystic Form, but he realizes that it's no good. He eventually gets sent back flying and gets ki blasted into a crater in a mountain, and Izuku's able to charge his God Ki and Mystic Form together to lunge back into the Majin creature, who simply laughs and begins toying with Deku as if he was some sort of toy. He begins to brutally begin beating on Izuku, grabbing him by the neck and punching him in the stomach repeatedly, slapping him in the face over and over, and then crushing his head on the ground with his boot, telling him that he's garbage. The wizard looks back at the direction of, his Majin creature and tells him to finish it. Do your job. Kill him. Suddenly, the Majin creature points one hand at the direction of the wizard and blows him up, saying, "I didn't like being told what to do." Suddenly, we then have Izuku look up at this creature who has the same appearance to his old master, as he reveals that he actually absorbed him, and Izuku is like, no, this can't be, right? And suddenly Izuku just gets angrier and angrier and angrier, and he's finally able to do it. He taps into his beast form. Izuku lets out a roar that could be heard from planets away, a roar that could be heard to the heavens themselves. His eyes begin changing to that of a crimson, purple, pink, violet color, and Izuku looks towards the direction of this Majin creature with red eyes and white hair flowing, as his muscles bulge and his speed increased, his power output has just went sky high, and Izuku went over towards this creature and began to essentially pummel it until he eventually realized that he needs to finish the battle before things get dangerous. So he uppercuts this being up into the air and immediately begins charging a blast, a gigantic Masenko that actually ends up obliterating every single trace of this creature's being from existence, and Izuku falls onto one knee as he then slowly gets back up and roars, saying, as he just won the battle, and his hidden Saiyan nature just comes out, right? And suddenly Izuku has a smile on his face as he then realizes that his master is gone. Champa arrives 2 weeks later and tells him not to worry, that there's these Dragon Ball things that actually exist. And Izuku says that they're real, before Champa explains of course they are, going on to wish that Kai back, saying that luckily the apprentice one survives, or else he would have been dead in his nap. And Izuku thanks Champa for all of his hard work. As Champa says, of course, kid, maybe someday you could even train to become a god of destruction. Deku rubs the back of his head and is like, highly doubt it. I mean, right now I'm trying to become a great hero. I mean, wouldn't it be impossible fighting between both positions? Champa says, maybe, kid, but we'll see. Someday the possibility might open up. I mean, my brother trained a certain somebody Vegeta for Universe 7, so maybe it's my turn to enlist somebody like you. Deku looks towards the direction of Champa, nods, and, bows before him, before suddenly Kai-Kaiing back to his planet, to his home, where he walks in and just goes, honey, I'm home. I don't know why, I just had to include that at the end. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be marking the ending to What If Deku Was Gohan's Reincarnation. AKA, what if Deku had all of Gohan's powers, abilities, and the Dragon Ball Z universe and My Hero Academia universe were linked, except Universe 6 is where Deku's at. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought about the scenario. Did you guys enjoy it? Did you guys hate it? Do you guys think I should, do another Dragon Ball character? Let me know down below in the comments. And without any further ado, it has been your boy Zyther. I love each and every single one of you guys, and I am out. Peace.